Avoiding a second-year dip for the Washington Commanders doesn't start with improving the team's biggest weakness. It starts with keeping their strengths strong. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome inside today's episode of Locked On Commanders. I'm your host, David Harrison, here with you every Monday through Friday, but more importantly, your friend on the ground, covering the Washington Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com and helping out with WUSA9.com's coverage of the team here locally. I want to thank you for coming through for today's episode. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about areas of improvement for the Washington Commanders offense, specifically going into next season. We're going to talk about why the best free agent option is not always the most realistic. And we're going to discuss how the Washington Commanders can avoid a sophomore slump under head coach Dan Quinn, general manager Adam Peters. Of course, everydayers, for those of you who come through every single day, I want to give a special thank you to you for coming through. And if you are not already, please subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to today's episode. If you're new to the show, thanks for coming through here this offseason. We're going to be here with you 5 days a week, all offseason long. So make sure you click that subscribe button again or follow. And we want to thank you for joining the Locked On Commanders podcast. Of course, Locked On Commanders is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So be sure to come back very soon. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers, you can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Highly recommend it if you can be smart while you're doing it. That's the most important thing, is be smart while you're gambling. Look, we're going to do a continuation of the mailbag today. We had mailbag Thursday, episode dropped yesterday. Usually mailbags are Wednesdays, but my schedule got a little bit wonky here. First week of the offseason and everything else. But we had so many good questions come through the mailbag. I wanted to go ahead and get through the rest of them. It's not going to be all of them. So if you don't hear your mailbag question here in these two episodes, don't worry. I've got them stashed away for a rainy day. We will use them. They don't just go away into the Ethernet and get lost. But we're going to kick it off here today with Jay, who came through and said, how do the Commanders avoid the pitfalls that the Texans and Packers suffered, i.e. having a strong year with a rookie or young quarterback followed by an off year? I think it's a very good question, because every day, as you've heard me say this before, it's really hard to win in the National Football League. It's even harder to do it multiple times in a row, multiple years, multiple seasons, do all those things. That's what makes the runs of guys like Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes so special, is it's so hard to do that on a year in, year out basis. So how do the Washington Commanders not even try to get into the Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes stratosphere of things, Bill Belichick, Andy Reid, but how do they just stack a second successful season on top of their first one and make sure they don't fall victim to some of the pitfalls that these other teams follow through? So since Jay mentioned the Texans and Packers specifically, I actually reached out to the host of Locked On Texans, John Hickman, and also a host of Locked On Packers, Peter Bukowski. Peter came through with a video response for you, Jay. So here's Peter Bukowski of Locked On Packers.
The Green Bay Packers banked on internal development to buoy Jordan Love in year two. I'm Peter Bukowski, host of Locked On Packers. And I think the idea that Jordan Love regressed in 2024 is just not in line with reality. I don't think he did. If you look at the advanced numbers, they say he was better. This Packers offense, it was better. What happened was he got hurt. And if I'm going to offer a cautionary tale to a team like the Commanders, it's two things. It's make sure that offensive line is as good as you can make it. That is going to be the most important thing. Trust Jayden Daniels to elevate your receiver room. But at the same time, the Packers believed Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, Dontavian Wicks, Bo Melton, with Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave, all young players. They believed, I think rightly, one or two or maybe even three would take a significant step forward, or even a baby step forward. Tucker Kraft did. Almost everyone else either stayed the same or got worse. That was surprising. I think in practice, they had a good idea. But what do they have to do this year? Well, they're probably going to have to go get a bucket-getting receiver, someone like a Devontae Adams, if they want to take this offense to the next level. That's the goal for Washington, is to take this offense, which was really good last year, to the next level. If you want to avoid regression, and I do think we need to expectation set here. a great rookie season does not mean Jayden Daniels is going to be even better next year. In fact, odds are, history tells us he's probably going to be a little worse. And that's okay. But if you want to maintain the efficiency of this offense, you have to invest in the pieces. The Packers, Jordan Morgan in the first round. That didn't work because he got hurt. But I think that's the right way to build this thing. Make sure you are maximizing your pass catchers and your blockers. The run game is already pretty good. Jayden Daniels is going to make the run game even better. Clearly, this offensive line needs to get better. Look at the Eagles. Jalen Hurts has all day to throw every time. Pretty useful. And the Commanders need another one of those. They have their bucket getter. It's 3rd and 8. We know where the ball is going. It can go to Terry McLaurin. But if you can add one more guy, like a Deebo Samuel, like a Devontae Adams, a high pick in this draft, now you've really got the infrastructure here to help Jayden Daniels succeed.
All right, so that was Peter Bukowski, Locked On Packers. Lots of good stuff there. And the main takeaways there, don't count on internal development, which to me sounds a lot like my old saying, approach the roster based on what you know, not what you hope. And you're going to hear me say that quite often this offseason because it's how I look at team building. It's how I look at roster building. Don't go off of things you hope are going to happen. Go off of things you know are happening in your building. And sometimes those lines can get a little bit blurry. We'll talk about that as the offseason progresses. But then you also have to protect Jayden. The common theme here with all these teams, Jordan Love, CJ Stroud, Jayden Daniels, is good, effective, young quarterbacks. You heard Peter talk about Jordan Love getting injured, CJ Stroud under attack all season long. You've got to find a way to keep Jayden Daniels healthy, first of all, but also help him stay comfortable. So, help him maintain that poise that he showed so much during that rookie year. And how do you do that? You get better up front. You get better with the weapons. John Hickman of Locked On Texans added to what Peter Bukowski said. Basically, he said, looking at the Houston Texans, they neglected the strengths of their players and felt like their scheme was going to overdo or overtake the downfalls that the roster had. Basically sounds a lot like plays over players when we know that Dan Quinn, Cliff Kingsbury on offense specifically, their adage is players over plays. So I don't think we have to worry about that. That's an assumption right now, but I think we have evidence to support that assumption, right? Go off of what you know, not what you hope. Neglecting raising the floor of your receiving room and depth altogether is another thing that John Hickman of Locked On Texans talked about. So again, getting weapons for your quarterback, not just saying, okay, let's do what we did last year, but do it better with the same guys that we have now. So if you look at the offensive line, I think the biggest thing that the Commanders have to address this offseason is the impact of losing Sam Cosmi. I know a lot of people out there really want to talk about tackles. They want to find a better Andrew Wiley. Is Brandon Coleman really the best left tackle? All of this stuff. But guys, I think you really, when you look at this front five, until you shore up what you've already lost, you can't look to then go and improve. And I'm not saying you can't do both in the same offseason. Certainly you go find a temporary replacement for Sam Cosmi and try to improve at the tackle position, right tackle or left tackle or both. So certainly you can do those things. But some names out there that we're looking at from the free agent standpoint, guard Trey Smith from the Kansas City Chiefs, tackle Ronnie Stanley from the Ravens, tackle Cam Robinson from the Vikings, and guard Will Fries from the Indianapolis Colts. Then you're looking at getting that second bucket getter, right? I love the way that Peter put that, the bucket getter analogy. And guys like wide receiver T. Higgins, Devontae Adams, Deebo Samuel, Chris Godwin. Those are going to be guys that I think you're going to hear a lot of us talk about here this offseason, guys that are all going to be available or are available to Chris Godwin. There's a little bit of I'll tell you right now, Tampa media very, very secure that Chris Godwin's coming back, which if he does, great for Chris. I know that'd be great for him and his family and obviously for the Bucs. But if he's available, certainly one of those second bucket getters, as Peter called him, that you go get. Looking at the draft, you've got guys like tackle Kelvin Banks Jr. out of Texas or tackle Josh Simmons out of Ohio State potentially that could be available there in the later part of the first round, depending on how the draft evaluation process goes from there. For them, interior lineman Donovan Jackson out of Ohio State again, Marcus Bowe out of Purdue, another interior offensive lineman prospects. Wide receivers Emeka Egbuka out of Ohio State, Matthew Golden out of Texas are a couple options of first round potential talents that could help out the Washington Commanders in any of these areas. So there's certainly the ability to raise the floor of your weapons and also approach your offensive line from what you know, right? Brandon Coleman, solid rookie year. Nick Allegretti, up and down first season, I think, for the Washington Commanders overall. Tyler Biadasz, solid when he was healthy and in there. Sam Cosmi is going to be out for a while. Andrew Wiley, solid, you can accept him. But obviously he's older. You've got to start working on a replacement plan there, even if it's not for 2025. And then receiver, you don't have a bona fide number 2 receiver. So go get that running mates for Terry McLaurin. So great insight from Peter. Great insight from John. Great question there from you, Jay. Again, and we'll dive deeper into all of these aspects of the team as we move into the offseason. But next up, we're going to talk about why the best free agent at a position is not always the most realistic target for your favorite team. That's next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you in part by our friends over at FanDuel. When the games tip off and the NBA action is just getting started, there is no better place to get involved in it than with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And with FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to bet on fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. I'm not the biggest NBA expert, so what I like to do is I like to watch a game, I like to get a feel for the flow. Look at this guy, like this guy might be getting hot here, this guy might be getting cold, and I like to make my live bets based off of what I'm seeing and feeling during the course of the game. Whether it's my favorite team or I'm looking at a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3, whatever it is, I use the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's easy to use. And when you win, we get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So go to FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Continuing now with today's a little bit of a bonus mailbag episode, right? Friday mailbag episode. Had so many good questions from the insiders that I decided to extend this out. And we still have good questions that are still not going to get answered after today's mailbag episode. So insiders, you guys keep bringing the heat. You have all season long. You continue doing it here in the offseason. I appreciate you greatly. If you want to get in on that and submitting those questions for these mailbag episodes, part of the perks of being an insider is that there's other perks as well. Go to joinsubtext.com/lockedoncommanders. You get to try it out for free for the first 2 weeks. And if you like it from there, you stick around. If you don't, hey, look, I always appreciate you giving it a shot either way. No harm, no foul. Timothy came through, said, what edge, corner, left tackle, and wide receiver do you want to go after in free agency? I'm going to be completely honest with you here. I don't think the Washington Commanders are looking to replace Brandon Coleman. I think they like Brandon Coleman. I think worst case scenario is maybe Brandon moves to the right side. They bring in a left tackle. So it's not so much replacing Brandon as it is shifting him to a different position. So I'm going to go left tackle here for you just because for part of the conversation. But I do want to be clear here that I do think Brandon Coleman has a starting job, in his grasp. I think there's going to be a competition every single year. So that being said, I think Brandon Coleman certainly will be the favorite there coming into it as we sit right now. Of course, signings can change. So I'm going to give you two options here. I'm going to give you the top guy at each of these position groups. And I'm also going to give you the quote unquote, what I call most realistic guy in this position group. And the idea here is as you go through the offseason, a lot of us think that Adam Peters might be a little bit more aggressive this offseason than he certainly was last offseason, and using the trade for Marshawn Lattimore as kind of evidence of that potentially happening. But I still don't think you're going to look at one, maybe two splash moves by Adam Peters this year. I wouldn't expect like three to five big name guys coming in here in one offseason, spending all that money in one shot. So looking at the edge group, I think the top guy, top free agent, right? Myles Garrett obviously is the top name, but he's not a free agent. He's a trade possibility. So the top free agent, I think, is going to be Josh Sweat from the Philadelphia Eagles, a guy who has certainly filled a really good role for the Eagles in their Super Bowl defense, but hasn't been like the dominant guy. And I don't think he's necessarily looking to be the quote unquote dominant guy, but going to another system where he can be an impactful part of it and certainly get some love himself is going to be attractive, right? The more reasonable option is kind of wild to say this, to be honest with you, Khalil Mack. You know what I mean? My question about Khalil Mack is going to be this. How much of the Bobby Wagner syndrome are we going to see with Khalil Mack? How much is the rest of the NFL going to wonder how much do you really have left in the tank? Because let's not forget, like Bobby Wagner came to Washington. A lot of people are like, man, he's probably washed up. How much can he really do physically? Came off a fairly good year in Seattle. Like it wasn't the best year of his career, the best year the NFL has ever seen, but fairly solid year. Khalil Mack kind of doing the same thing for a Chargers team that really wasn't able to get things off the ground fully, did make it to the playoffs. So I think, if Khalil Mack falls into that older guy, how much does he really have left in the tank? Then potentially you see his market value drop, especially with some of these other guys that are out there. Josh Sweat, Myles Garrett available potentially for trade. Trey Hendrickson also wanting a trade or being talked about in trade conversation. So because of all these things, Khalil Mack's market could fall significantly. So he might actually turn out to be the more quote unquote reasonable option. You sign him to a 1-year deal, maybe go draft a guy on day 3 to continue to advance behind them, or third round or whatever it is you feel like, and you kind of go from there. Looking at cornerbacks, the top guy on the free agent list seems to be DJ Reed. New York Jets, not a guy who's going to necessarily break the bank himself, but certainly the top target. More reasonable guy for me, Nate Hobbs from the Las Vegas Raiders, strong slot defender, plays with an edge to him, has a little bit of a chip, plays very aggressive. I like a guy like Nate Hobbs. Jordan Lewis from the Dallas Cowboys is kind of the more obvious slot free agency pickup guy coming from the Dallas Cowboys. Obviously, the Commanders staff knows him very well. But if that doesn't happen, Nate Hobbs from the Raiders, certainly not a bad decision. Not a bad guy to pursue, especially if the team is going to keep Mikey Sainer still outside, which we still don't know for sure. So certainly could be an outside corner that they're looking at there as well. Looking at the left tackle position, the top guy is Ronnie Stanley from the Baltimore Ravens. If you sign him, he's a left tackle. You're moving Brandon Coleman to right tackle, doing what you got to do there. More reasonable option, probably Dan Moore, guy like him from the Pittsburgh Steelers, who's going to come in, probably compete with Brandon Coleman. One of them's going to push, the other's going to push. Likely you're not going to bring back Cornelius Lucas if this is the situation. But I think Dan Moore is kind of that more reasonable left tackle. Not as sexy of a name, but a little bit more affordable. Wide receivers. Top guy is going to be T. Higgins from the Cincinnati Bengals. I've already told you all every day, as you already know this. I think this bidding war is going to get way too high for Adam Peters, and T. Higgins not coming to Washington because of it. But T. Higgins certainly is the top free agent guy out there. Devontae Adams, a potential trade target. Chris Godwin, certainly no slouch himself. But the more reasonable option for the Commanders to pursue a receiver in free agency, in my opinion, Darius Slayton. And I actually got to talk during Super Bowl week with Jalen Hyatt, New York Giants wide receiver, about Darius, what he brings to the field, what he brings to the locker room. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with you guys here as we get into the offseason and we get a little bit clearer picture of what's going on. So great question there. Hopefully it gave you some good options to talk about there. Cam, it came through. Insider Cam wants to know, what's an old or older vet that isn't in the news should the Commanders target on a 1 or a 2-year deal similar to the success they had last year? Any running backs, perhaps a Marcus Mariota replacement? So Khalil Mack obviously fits in that category. We just kind of already talked about him, but really he's kind of like the Bobby Wagner of this year's class, so to speak, right? As for running backs, you got a few running backs, not really the older quote unquote type, but you've got some guys with some injury histories. I mean, J.K. Dobbins has been in the league for a little bit, so maybe you consider him older, especially for a running back, right? 26 is old for a running back. Nick Chubb, not so, like I said, not necessarily like you're older, like 35-year-olds or anything like that, but guys who certainly have some upside. Not sure if you bring either of those guys in, like, does it make the running back room too crowded? Like, do you have enough touches and all that stuff to give to make these guys all happy? I don't know about that. Probably just stick to the NFL draft for that, to be quite honest with you. As for quarterbacks, Russell Wilson is, the elder guy, but I don't really see him being willing to take on a mentorship role behind Jayden Daniels. Jameis Winston is going to be out there, but again, not sure how much he can really bring to Jayden at this stage. He's a lot of fun to have around. Like, I'm a big Jameis fan as a person. Would rather just have Marcus Mariota back, to be honest with you. I had a lot of fun getting to know Marcus last year. I would love to see him back in the building. Defensive tackle DJ Jones is a really big dude in the middle of the defensive line, rotational guy that you could potentially bring in that not a lot of people are going to talk about. Linebacker Robert Spillane. I think he's an interesting special teams contributor, but also on rundowns. You know what I mean? There's a rundown coming up. You bring him in there. He's a really good run defender, I should say, very aggressive attacker of the run game, getting downhill. Center Ryan Kelly is interesting. Indianapolis Colts. He might actually retire, but if he doesn't, you bring in a guy who could certainly play guard, right? So you could push him potentially to right guard, play him next to Tyler Biadasz, and, knock on wood, it doesn't happen. But if you need a center to come in there for a rep or a game or two, like we did this last year, you have a guy in Ryan Kelly's got a lot of experience there and certainly can kind of come in and you don't lose a lot from the center position. So it'd be interesting to see if they have any conversations with him on a 1-year deal. Defensive tackle Tier Tart, again, another dude who is kind of known that he's got some talent and ability, just hasn't really been able to stick in any one location. So I think that Tier Tart potentially coming to Washington would be an interesting option for the team to consider. Of course, they've got to consider a lot of things to try to improve this team from 2024 to 2025, including some things on the scheme side. that could help improve the offense. We'll continue now with our mailbag episode here on Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we're going to do that today, thanks in part to our friends over at Prize Picks. Football season may be over. Pain. But basketball is in full swing, and there's no better way to stay in the game than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you simply pick more or less on at least 2 player stat projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. This week, I'm looking at Boston Celtics star Jason Tatum to get more than 29 points. And the best part is Prize Picks is quick and easy. You can set your lineup in less than 60 seconds, and their fast and secure withdrawals means that I get my winnings in as little as 15 minutes. Plus, I love their weekly promos like Taco Tuesday. Who doesn't love Taco Tuesday? Where you get discounted player projections for an even better value. So download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup on Prize Picks. Run your game. Wrapping up this Friday mailbag episode, back-to-back mailbag episodes. That's how many great questions we got from insiders. And again, we've got even more still hanging back. So we'll have those for future mailbag episodes as well. Insider Bill came through. As bad as Washington looked against the pass, the running game looked bad on both sides of the ball. Stopping the run is just as important as establishing it. Facts. So what position is Washington going after in free agency? What do they leave for the draft? Just looking for positions, not names. It's really hard to kind of answer a question like this, to be quite honest with you, because a lot of it kind of plays hand in hand, right? Like who you see available in free agency impacts who you look at in the draft, and vice versa. Who you really love in the draft and feel like you can get will impact your free agency approach. I think that you're going to see this team pursue defensive tackles and edge rushers in this year's free agency class. And I think you're also going to see them pursue edge rushers, linebackers, and star players, star positions. So safety hybrid linebacker type guys in the NFL draft. I think you're going to look to kind of get a guy like a Dominique Hampton, to put behind Jeremy Chin. I think they decided Dominique is going to be a full-time linebacker. But you're also going to look for guys, again, draft off of what you know, not what you hope, right? Jordan McGee, very solid rookie year when he was available. The problem is dude was injured all year long. So you've got to go out there. I think you've got to put some more linebacker depth behind Bobby Wagner, because eventually you're going to need somebody to replace Bobby Wagner. And right now you don't have that guy, that heir apparent. Hopefully you don't need him this year, right? Edge, I think you can never have enough pass rushers. So you're certainly going to kick the tires in free agency. You're going to do the same in the NFL draft. But D tackle, I think when you look at what this group has, if you're going to trade Jonathan Allen or trade Daron Payne or trade both, I mean, if you trade both, you're probably drafting a defensive tackle, right? That'll change the outlook there a little bit. But with Johnny Newton on the roster, you got some other good pieces. Sheldon Day might be able to come back as a veteran free agent. I think that you're probably looking at maybe free agency. If you do trade one of those guys, maybe you go out there and sign another depth guy in free agency and maybe look to draft a starter to replace him. So again, hard to really say specifically, but just kind of some ideas on how things look right now, given where the Washington Commanders are. Dr. Wonderful also came through. How do you see the offense progressing next season? Washington ran a quote-unquote college offense with several spot concepts and misdirection plays. Where are some areas this offense might improve? And do you see a more quote-unquote pro style from us offense this year? So first off, I'm going to say this. I don't like the phrase college offense, right? Because there's a lot of concepts in the NFL that started in college. It's been happening as long as there's been college football and NFL football. Like college games are just a little bit more willing to take risks because they kind of have to, especially the less talented teams, the lesser talented teams. Things like West Coast, style offenses. I mean, these types of things, like these things all kind of started in, I don't say all of them, but like a lot of these kind of tenets that we see in today's game that's very common started in the college game. So I don't really like the phrase college offense. However, I will say when we look at Cliff, he's always been a fan taking deep shots. And the thing about running so many vertical routes in your offense is that you have to find ways to trick defenders into taking a false step to get that advantage off them. So that's where the misdirection, that's where the movement log call kind of comes into play. So I don't think you're going to see many changes from that type of an offense. What I think you're going to see changes in is the way that they block. They've got to block this thing up a little bit better, whether that's using more motion, whether that's using more pulls, whether it's using less pulls, whatever it is, they've got to get better up front, even if it's from a personnel standpoint. And Jayden, I think the next step that he can take as an NFL quarterback, we've kind of talked about this, is being more four-dimensionally aware of the field. Again, the difference between design checkdowns and actual checkdowns, right? Actual checkdowns, second play, scrambling, we're moving the pocket, guy comes free. It's not part of the route design, but he comes free underneath. Jayden finds him, is willing to take that and allow the playmaker to make the play. Whereas a design check down, the quarterback kind of already knows, like, hey, look, first read, second read, third read. If none of that is there, I've got this guy over here. He's going to be there. So it's a difference between seeing the full field and understanding your route concepts. So certainly Jayden understands the route concepts. And I think later on in the season, we saw Cliff dial up more checkdowns in his designs to give him that avenue. But I think you also want to see Jayden just become better at finding those checkdowns as we get through his NFL career. So those are some ways where I think the offense can take a step forward. And again, as players get added, right, you add a guy like T. Higgins or a guy like Chris Godwin that can certainly open up some things for your offense as well. So we'll see how those types of things change as the course of the offseason goes. That is the fun of team building, is every change you have absolutely changes things. So I appreciate all the questions coming through. We've got more questions again stashed in the mailbag for future episodes, but this is going to do it for this one and for potentially this week. I've got a fun interview with Brian Robinson, Austin Eckler from Super Bowl week that I want to put together for you guys for a bonus episode, potentially dropping that on Saturday. But if I don't do that, no matter what, we will be back again Monday for our next mock draft Monday. Haven't figured out the theme of it yet, but we'll get there and we'll get to it and we'll get that thing laid out. In the meantime, if you want to become a Locked On Commanders insider, get involved in episodes just like this one, go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. And for your next listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast. Tyler Rowland kicks you off in the morning with some NFL espresso. Tony Wiggins comes back through in the afternoon for some real NFL talk. It's the all-new Locked On NFL, and it's twice per day. As always, I want to thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day. Every dayers, I want to thank you especially for coming through every day. And until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I will see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.